Hello, hello, good evening, good evening. Just popping on to get ready for our great discussion that we're going to have for our August book club. Going to wait a couple seconds and see if some folks start popping on. This is going to be a good discussion, nice and juicy. So I'm looking forward to having some folks come on in and join us. And please, if you're here, drop your name or drop where you're from in the comments so we'll know that you're here and know where you're joining us from today. Um, for those of you who don't know me or this is your first time joining us for one of the book club event, the BGC book club events, my name is Marcy Thomas. I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and also the founder of the BGC Book Club, which was started back in April as an opportunity for us to come together and not just be a place where we're sharing information about women and the things that they're doing, but also to have a space for us to have great authors and folks come on and we can share in reading their books, or even if you haven't read the book yet, to just be able to hear from them and maybe be encouraged to go out and get the book. So I see Debbie is here from Charleston. Glad you could make it, Debbie, because I know you reached out to me earlier and you were afraid of the storm. So I'm glad that you're able to come on. Jan, great greetings from Las Vegas. Glad you're here. Yeah, Kanika, forgive me if I'm not saying that correct, from Texas. So welcome. Well, without any further delay, you can go ahead and continue to drop those where you're from in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the book for the evening, as well as our guest author and speaker. And we'll be talking about The Love That Prison Made and Unmade, My Story by Ebony Roberts. A little bit about Ebony. She is a writer, researcher, and activist who has worked in the food, justice, and prison abolition movements for nearly 20 years. She recently served as program director for Beyond Prisons, an organization designed to uplift the voices of those impacted by the criminal justice system. She received her BA in social relations and psychology and a Ph.D. in educational psychology from Michigan State University, which I had not told her this. My first year of college was actually at Michigan State. So we have that in common. And she currently lives in Los Angeles. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and bring Ebony in and welcome her.
Hello.
Oh, Dr. Ebony, Dr. Roberts.
Yes, I'm hearing an echo on my end now. We didn't have an echo at first.
Okay.
Do you hear it?
I'm not hearing that.
You're not hearing it? Okay, well, if I'm the only one hearing it, then I won't worry about it.
Okay, as long as it's not too distracting for you.
Okay, yeah.
You okay?
Yep, I'm okay.
Okay, well, welcome, Dr. Ebony Roberts.
Thank you so much, Marcy.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I remember meeting you almost a year ago at the stress protest, Girl Trek's stress protest.
Absolutely.
And we connected, and it's just been so beautiful to get to know you via Facebook and Instagram. And I just appreciate your support of the book and inviting me to be a part of the Brown Girl Collective Book Club. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're welcome. And actually, as I've already told you, I've actually read the book twice. The first time I did the audio, which was great, but this time I actually read it, which was for me even better because I was able to write things down. There were things that happened, like books that you were reading and stuff. Oh, let me go write that down. I think I want that book. So it was good to have a couple of opportunities and then also to be able to share it with a wider audience. So before we get into some questions, and audience members, please feel free, if you have questions, you can drop them in the comments. I will be able to post some things up as well, so people can actually read your comments. Ebony, please go ahead and share a little bit of the book, a little excerpt for those who may not have had the chance to actually read it yet.
Okay, so I met, just to give you some context for the book, I met Shaka Senghor in 2005. I was a young activist. I was in my mid-20s in Detroit, working with the organization that sent books into prisons. We also chartered buses and provided transportation to families to go visit their loved ones who were incarcerated in state prisons across Michigan. And I had gone into a facility in Michigan to speak, and I met Shaka at this program. It was a Black History program, and what often happens inside prison is that the men and women who are incarcerated organize those types of programs. The prison doesn't organize those programs, so they have Kwanzaa programs, Black History programs, and so this particular program was a Black History program. And I went inside. There was a main speaker, and then I was there and met him. Obviously going in strictly for business. But he had this really big sort of presence in the room. Right, it was very clear that he was a leader among the men. And he was one of the coordinators of the program, so he had a very, very large presence. And so right after the program ended, he sent me a letter. And because I was so busy with my life, I'm working in several organizations and full-time job, I didn't respond to his letter right away. But a year later, I did send him a letter. And that started a correspondence that lasted over 4 years. It developed into a relationship. And he came home in 2010. And we struggled through those initial, years after his release because of traumas from his life in prison and both his life before he came home and my own, baggage as well. And so I write about our journey through those 4 years before he came home, how we fell in love, some of the challenges that we faced while he was incarcerated, as well as the challenges we faced once he came home, and really kind of shining a light on some of the problems with the prison system, and talk about both the good and the bad of our relationship. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I do have some excerpts that I've earmarked, and I can start. The first excerpt that I would like to read is actually our first visit. So although I had met him inside prison and I had been inside prison before, they were all, in a group setting. So this visit that I'm going to describe was our first one-on-one visit in a visiting room, not in a gymnasium with, tens of other people. And so we had been corresponding at this point for about 2 months. And my feelings for him had begun to grow. And I had agreed to come up and visit him. So I'm visiting somebody who I had never touched, who had never kissed, but I had begun to fall in love with him, and was very nervous about this first visit. The door opened slowly as if another dimension had been unlocked. I walked into the room, my heart pounding, my armpits still sweating, and stopped. I noticed a row of inmates in their blue and orange uniforms seated to my right and tried to find Shaka's face. I stood there for what seemed like forever, feeling awkward and insecure like the new kid waiting to be picked for kickball. Finally, our eyes met. Shaka stood up and walked quietly toward me. The anxiety in my chest made its way up my throat and stayed there. He greeted me with a half smile, his face still as serious as I remembered, and then he hugged me, his big, broad chest swallowing my small frame. I said something, maybe hello, but I'm not sure. Shaka looked nothing like I remembered him. He wore a pair of state-issued glasses that were unflattering, and his dreadlocks hung like a wet mop instead of the regal mane I remembered. But when he grabbed my hand, his hand felt like home. Our fingers fit together perfectly, as if two misplaced puzzle pieces have found each other.
Thank you. That's a good excerpt and it's a good introduction into how you all came together. And of course, there's some things that we'll talk about this evening, maybe some we won't get to.
Yes.
But one of the things that I recall just in reading your story, even leading up to meeting him, that one of the things that was always important to you was to have an ideal type of love, an ideal type of love affair, whether it be from things that you may have experienced in childhood, not seeing that with your own parents, and then kind of, what should I say, being inspired by like Cosby's, just some of those different shows that show these great Black families. So, and then in your college years, beginning to get more into the movement and things like that, and seeing these great power movement couples. So it doesn't surprise me that in seeing him as a leader and you seeing yourself as a leader, that you all would have come together and like, we can be that. And I think even the beginning of your book says that we could be that. So, and in talking and saying all the right words and working on towards the same goals, or so it appeared at that point in time, I could see how that happened. So did some of that initial connection also stem from those things from earlier in your life and having that desire?
Yeah, I would say the connection really started with our discussion of Black history, Black liberation movements. It took us a while before we got into like our childhood, our childhoods and some of the things that had shaped and influenced us. And so for me, I was, young, like I said, mid 20s. So in 2006, when we first started talking, I was 30. And so at that point, I had dated my share of guys that I thought was the one, guys that I wanted more. They were emotionally unavailable. I wanted more from them than what they were willing to provide. And because I had been so actively involved in the community, I came across a lot of brothers who were conscious, and that was attractive to me. That was a quality that I wanted, somebody who I could, stand side by side in the community. We were doing great works together. And that was important, at a young age because of kind of how I had come up through, my work in college, but also the work I had been doing in Detroit up to that point. And a guy who wasn't interested in those things just really wasn't attractive to me, and, there were a number of, just being completely transparent, because of the work that I did, many of the men that were in my circle were men who were products of the 60s and 70s Black Power movements. And I'm a young, mid 20s. By the time I met Shaka, I was, 30. But at the time that I was actively involved in the movement, I was young and they were in their 40s and 50s. And for me, that was too old. They were old enough to be my father, or my uncle, or, someone. And I had, a handful that did express an interest. But I was young and was looking for someone more in my age group. And there just weren't very many guys in my age group who were serious, who were conscious, who were serious about the work in the community, and had, the political understanding that I had. And so when Shaka and I first started corresponding, that's what we connected around, and that was really important to me. And I had dated, one other guy before him who had also actually had been in prison, but I had dated another guy who had that sort of political understanding of race. And I, outside of him, hadn't dated anybody. And so when I met Shaka, and there was just this connection around so many of the things that mattered to me, it was like, it just grew like wildfire, the connection between us.
Right. And him being in prison, and that by the time you met him, he was on the tail end of his sentence. So he had many years, kind of like in a Malcolm X type of fashion, study, to learn, to grow, to just, gain that knowledge. One of the things that you mentioned that I found funny, you said he would like say words and write words that are like, what is this? Some of those words, as I mentioned, since I was actually reading versus listening, I was like, I had to go look the words up too. Like, what is that? Talking about. So, and I can imagine after you having gone to college, gotten your Ph.D. by that point, to have someone on that level and was so intelligent, and could speak to the things that spoke to your heart. I definitely could see, where that attraction may have come in. But then, of course, I think it took a while before you started really talking to other people about your ongoing correspondence with Shaka.
Mm-hmm.
Was there, well, I kind of figure why, but just kind of tell us why you may have been a bit apprehensive about that at first.
You know, I was apprehensive because he was in prison, and the perceptions of men and women in prison. And, you know, it wasn't when we actually started a relationship, because, you know, initially we were just corresponding. And so it really wasn't a need to talk about him much to people that in my life. But once we decided to start a relationship, I knew that there would be judgments, and I was afraid that they, you know, the people who cared about me would plant seeds of doubt. And I wanted to protect the love that was growing between us. And so I was very selective about who I shared our relationship with, because I didn't want them to I would already have my own doubts in the very beginning, and I didn't want anybody to feed the fear or feed the, you know, the questions that I might have already had. I do write in the book about my mom's response, and so after my mom's response, you know, I just wanted to just be careful with, you know, who I shared that relationship with, because everybody's got an opinion. And you know, I didn't have, you know, too many people who said negative things,
Right.
but I know what they were thinking based on the silence, right? So if you tell somebody that you're in love with somebody in prison, and then the room gets silent, they're processing, but they're also trying to not say the first thing on their mind, which is, are you crazy? You know, is this, you know, which is a reasonable question, you know, because you just don't expect for someone to tell you some news like that. And so I just wanted to protect it. And so eventually I shared our relationship with more people, particularly as he got closer to coming home.
Right.
But you know, there are some women who don't tell anybody. And they're literally, because it's a lonely place to be in, you know, when you have a relationship with somebody who's incarcerated, because most women don't share that, because they know the judgment that they'll find. And they don't tell their family, they don't tell their friends. And so that's a very lonely life to live. You're already alone. He's hundreds of miles away, and you're not, you know, he's not there with you. And then on top of that, having to deal with the judgment as well, and feeling like you can't really share your life with someone because of the fear that you're going to be judged.
Right. And it was interesting when you mentioned your mom and her, you know, her original thought. I'm sure over time it probably changed, but initially, but then looking at the relationship that your mom had with your dad, I guess in her own way, she was not wanting you to repeat, perhaps end up repeating some of the things that she went through, since she had a challenging relationship with your dad. Speaking of your dad, how do you feel that your relationship with him impacted the types of men that you may have been interested in, or did it not have an impact on you?
You know, it didn't dawn on me until many years later that there was a connection. And actually, even in writing this book, I discovered, you know, because I interviewed my family, right? And I interviewed my brother, I interviewed my mom, and I learned some things about my dad that I didn't know. My dad died when I was young, and my brother is 3 years older than me. So his memories of our family and of my dad in particular are much more vivid than mine. And so there were some things that I learned about my dad that shocked me. And I put some of it in the book, but you know, I early on was attracted to bad boys. And, you know, my dad was a bit of a bad boy, but it wasn't until much later that I put the connection, you know, that I was unable to save my dad. My dad was an alcoholic, and he died when I was 12. And, you know, I realized that I have this savior or hero complex that a lot of women have, particularly Black women, because we're such helpers and nurturers. And this is what we, you know, this is what we do. And so many of the young men that I was interested in high school and in college and even into my mid-20s were all in some form or fashion bad boys, you know. And there's obviously, you know, there's something exciting about that, you know, but also just, you know, once I had a sort of political or revolutionary lens to look at all that through, I realized that bad boys were also the ones who didn't color in the lines. And that was something that really resonated with me, because I'm not a, you know, or I was growing up more of a, you know, do things by the book, you know, because wasn't trying to, you know, make any waves. But then as I became more politicized in college and beyond, I began to think differently about life and about, you know, organizing and all those things. And so what was attractive to me about men who were sort of seen as bad boys is that they weren't the straight-laced, follow the rule type, that they were more like, you know, sort of aspirational for me in terms of the type of life in community that I wanted to live, and being somebody who was, you know, a revolutionary. So, but yes, it was the bad boy connection and trying to sort of save and be the person that loved him enough, this whoever the guy was at the time, right, that loved him in a way that no other girl or no other woman had ever loved him before. And I was going to be the one to save him. And that my particular brand of love was exactly what he was missing in his life.
Right. And it's interesting that you would say that, because I'm remembering when your parents were about to get married, and I want to say your dad went to your grandfather, and I think he said, do you care for her? And he was like, no, I love her. And your grandfather was like, that's not enough.
That's not enough.
That's not enough. After 40 years of marriage, he knew that wasn't enough just to love someone. So that's just interesting that was something that you felt, and you may not even know that your grandfather said that at that point, but yeah, that love would be enough. Well, I will say to you, Ms. Ebony, you did a lot of loving. There was a lot that went on, and, you know, of course, you and Shaka corresponding back and forth with one another and reading some of the letters that he wrote, and I was like, ooh, this is real flowery. There's a lot going on, and even sometimes you were like, really?
It was hard. I admit in the book that it was kind of hard to read some of those really poetic letters with all this flowery, you know, language. It was hard. It's those things that as a woman you want to hear, but when you hear it, you're like, you running game on me. Like, what is this? You know. So yeah, that the letters were beautifully written, but they were definitely sometimes a bit over the top with the language. So,
well, one of the things, like with you, I mean, I just thought about all of the times that you would get on the road, you know, no matter where he was, you know, risking your life and limb on, you know, to go and visit him, sometimes by yourself, sometimes taking other people with you. I mean, it was just a lot of sacrifice that you really had to make in the context of the relationship that you had with him, you know, between the visits and the phone calls and, you know, helping him with getting his writing career going and all that. There was a lot that you did, and you know, it's commendable on the one hand, but then on the other hand, it's like, okay, she's putting in a lot of work. And
I know.
And there were times in the book you mentioned where maybe he would get frustrated with you because you weren't doing things in the timeline that he wanted you to do them, like there wasn't anything else going on in your life. So just, you know, talk a little bit about that. How was how did that make you feel when you knew that you were giving all that you could?
You know, it was frustrating for anybody who has a loved one who's been in prison. They know, you know, you are a lifeline for them, right? You're a lifeline. You're a bridge to the free world. And so if you happen to be romantically involved, I think that the expectation is even higher that you're going to take care of business for them. So, you know, they are, you know, obviously very limited. You know, they don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to the resources. You know, they do have libraries, but those libraries are still very limited. They can possibly get, you know, they can purchase books if they have money. But for the most part, you know, they're limited in what they can do outside of communicating, you know, through letters and you know, phone calls. That's about it. And so I willingly helped him build his writing career because I knew that coming home, it wasn't going to be easy for him to get a job. You know, he's coming home with a felony. He was was convicted of second-degree murder. So you have a murder conviction, you have a felony. It's going to be hard for him to get a job. And so I willingly helped him build a book business. He had written several books when I met him. And so, and he was a, you know, great writer. And so I helped him build this business out. And he was impatient because he felt like literally his entire world, once he came home, was dependent on this business doing well, you know, because he didn't want to have to worry about getting a job. So, you know, this business had to work. And in order for this business to work, I had to do all the work.
Right.
And I was still actively involved in all the same organizations that I was involved in when I met him. And I also worked for a school and was very active in the work that I did for my paid job. And, you know, it was a lot, you know, it was a lot. And I felt like it was never, the endless list of requests never ended. And when I didn't do something in what he felt was a timely fashion, that we would have, you know, there would be friction because he felt like it was urgent. And I'm like, well, it's going to get done, but it's got to be done, you know, when I can get to it. Right. And so and he felt like I didn't respect the work, that I was minimizing the importance of what was needed to be done. And I felt like he wasn't appreciative of what I was doing, which was quite a bit. Because, you know, at that point, I had never written a book. I had finished my Ph.D., so I had written a dissertation, which is essentially a book. But I had never written anything outside of a dissertation. So, but I'm a good writer, and, you know, I'm a good editor. And so I had to actually retype all of his books because he had written them on a word processor in prison. So those typed manuscripts he mailed to me. I had to retype everything, and we're talking word processor pages, which, you know, is fewer words fit on a word processor page because the letters are bigger than the fonts that we use, you know, computers. So you're talking, you know, 300 plus pages of word processor document that I had to retype and edit and format. And so I did all of that, getting the cover designed and, you know, formatting, finding a company, and, you know, all of the work that went into it. And then once we got the books done, I was responsible for promoting the book, you know, getting flyers and ads, and, you know, it was a lot. It was a lot. And so it's a lot of work, you know, whenever, and like I said, whether you're a family member or, you know, you're intimately involved, it's a lot of work if you're trying to help them, because in his case, you know, he didn't see many other options outside of these books. And so it was like urgent that he get this done. And that just puts so much pressure on him and on me.
I can imagine. Well, someone asked, usually correspondence is screened before they allow the letters to be shared. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, I'm sure the letters were screened. I don't think that they probably read every single letter, and I don't think that they read every single line. But, you know, the calls are recorded, and because you're calling, you know, that when they call you, you know, they're calling on a secure line. So the calls are recorded. The letters do go through a screening process. So when we were taking care of business, because technically, you know, inmates are not allowed business or to make any kind of money. So when we discussed business, we did do it through letters because we couldn't do it over the phone, because it was the screening of phone calls was much more, the scrutiny was much higher on a phone call than in a letter. Like I said, because I don't think that they're reading through every line. So I would put stuff in letters, and he would send me letters, and we would put stuff into the letters. And then whenever we could do a visit, we would discuss business on our visits as well. But they are screened. I discuss this in the book. I won't get into it here because I don't want to reveal too much. But because they are watching the mail, there was something that they did discover in one of the mailings that I sent to him, which created this lawsuit that the state sued Shaka. So yeah, it was definitely screened, and depending on who was going through the screening, how diligent they were, may depend on whether or not you get a letter, you know, that has problems going through or not.
Well, once again, not to give that away, I did find that part of the book interesting. Them suing him, basically, he could only get 10% of whatever was made, and the rest would have to go to the state. And like that's
yeah, that applies to any income. So if they have any inheritance, you know, if a family member dies, you know, and they have an inheritance, they can only get 10%.
Wow.
If, you know, there's any kind of, you know, there's some of them that are artists, and they may send out their art, you know, to be sold. There's a number of organizations who work with inmates that, you know, are very talented in different forms of art. And so they, you know, they can only get a certain amount of the proceeds, or they can just send it to their family, which is what a lot of them do, just so that they are not, you know, giving the state the money, because basically what the state is trying to do is recoup the costs to incarcerate them.
Yeah, that was something. Now, just kind of a sidebar about you mentioned about, you know, you as an intimate partner, but also it could be siblings, it could be parents, in managing the things that are going on with the person who's incarcerated. In your particular situation, was there a lot coming from Shaka's family, or were you the primary person who was helping him with all that was going on?
I was the only person helping him with all of that. So he did not have much support from his family, which was a pain point for him. His dad was very involved throughout the entire length of his incarceration. You know, I think, as the case with most men and women who get locked up, you know, the letters in the beginning come relatively regular, and then they fall off, you know. And so that's what happened with his family. So he, you know, he rarely heard from family, and often it was, if he heard from them, it was because he reached out first and sent them a letter, and then maybe they responded. But it was a lot of responsibility on him to keep that relationship going, if there was a relationship. But yeah, when I came into his life, there wasn't the level of support there, or the sense of urgency to help him. So I was responsible for all of that. We did have some family members who helped, you know, who donated some money to help us get his book published. But it was a small amount compared to what we needed to get it done. So.
Gotcha. Another thing that I found interesting, as you were involved with him and you met him while he was in prison, there were some groups that you got involved with, online groups and
Mm-hmm.
of women who were had intimate partner relationships, and a lot of them made a differentiation between
Mm-hmm.
people like you who met the person while they were in prison versus people who knew the person beforehand. Just give us a little insight into that and how um, folks are oftentimes looked at differently depending on
Right.
how the relationship started.
Right. So there's judgment across the board, right? But then within this group of already sort of judged and ostracized women, there's sort of a hierarchy. And so there are a number of women who knew their partner before he got incarcerated. Some of them were only friends before he got locked up, and then maybe reconnected years after, and after he got locked up and started, a relationship later. But technically they knew them before they got locked up. So they weren't, he wasn't a stranger in the case he was for me. And then there's some who were actually partnered up, maybe married, maybe have children. And so they were in full relationships before he got locked up and continued that relationship. Or maybe there was some, off and on during the period of their incarceration. And then there were women like me who did not know him before. And so there was a lot of judgment there among that group of women who knew their partners beforehand, because they felt like, well, you don't know him. I know my man because I knew him before he got locked up. So I know what I'm getting into. I know, we've lived a life together. I know what his morning breath smells like. I know him, and you don't know anything. All you have is what he tells you. And so, which is true. And so there were constant debates about which relationship was more likely to succeed. So women who did not know their partners before that he got locked up, their argument was, well, you're still with a man who hurt you. He got locked up and he hurt you, and blah 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 blah. And I'm basically with a man who has transformed his life at this point in his incarceration. So he hasn't hurt me. He hasn't done those things to me that hurt you before he got locked up. So I don't have that baggage, and I don't have all the things that you carry around in terms of, the baggage. And then of course the women who knew their partner felt like, all the women were being scammed. If you didn't know him beforehand, you were absolutely being scammed, because there's no way you could know him without, having some history with him. And as with anything, there is no right or wrong, because every situation is different. There are tons of men. I don't know the numbers, of course, but there are tons of men who do use women, and they use the women who knew them before they got locked up too. They don't just use the women that they didn't know before they got locked up and that happened to meet them through a pen pal or through a relative, or, the many ways that men meet women in prison. But, men who are going to use women are the same men who use the women when they're free, right? If he's a womanizer, if he uses women for money or companionship or whatever he does before he got locked up, it's possible that he may do the same when he's in prison. And it means that he may do that to a woman he's already known, as much as he may do to a woman that he a stranger that he meets, after he gets locked up. So, every situation is different. And I call myself a good judge of character. And I felt good about Shaka. I felt like he wasn't, as poetic as his letters were, I still didn't feel like he was slick talk. You know what I'm saying? Like he was trying to deceive me. It all felt very genuine. And I didn't pick up on anything that made me question who he was as a person, like his character. And I had questions about, okay, is he going to come home and be able to be faithful to one woman? I did worry about that in the beginning. But in terms of who he was as a person, I didn't question whether or not he was deceiving me. And I mean, but that's a very real concern, no matter how you met that's a real
Absolutely.
concern, you know, because he's going to come home after being in prison and life is not the same.
Right.
And the system is set up for them to fail when they come home because it's a business, right? And so the recidivism rate, or the rate at which men and women go back to prison after they've been released, is 70 to 80%.
Wow.
So that means that only 20 to 30% of men and women who come home stay home.
Wow.
I'm going to say that again. Only 20 to 30% of the men and women who come home from prison stay home. That's a small number. It's too small. The system is not set up for them to succeed, because that would put somebody out of a job, right? If they're not going back, in addition to the new cases, the ones that, you know, were in prison aren't coming back for parole violations or continuing to live the lifestyle that led them to prison in the first place. Somebody's gonna be put out of a job, right? So they are not invested, in most cases are not invested in seeing them succeed. And so they already have so much stacked against them. So whether you knew them before he got locked up or you didn't know him before he got locked up, there has to be some supports around him and around your relationship in order for it to succeed. And that's what I wish I had known before, you know, he came home. And knowing what he needed, and being able to put those things in place.
Well, since we are at that point, you know, after 4 years,
4 years,
a lot of stops and starts, and, you know, thinking he's going to get out or get parole, and then it gets delayed. And, you know, there were a couple times things happened that, you know, he may have caused a delay for himself. Once he finally is released and comes home, what was that like? What was that initial feeling for you after all this time of loving this person, getting to know this person, supporting this person, and then he comes home? What was that like for you?
It felt like it was never going to happen at one point. And so when it finally happened, it didn't even feel real for a long time. It didn't feel real. And it was a huge adjustment. You know, I had been single and living alone. By the time he came home, you know, I had gotten so used to living alone that was a struggle, because we made the decision to live together as soon as he came home, which in hindsight, we should have lived apart. You know, I think that anybody who's ever lived with a romantic partner knows that it adds a lot of stress to the relationship. And so I think that it added an additional stress on top of everything else. It added an additional stress on us. So I was just in, you know, la la land for the first few weeks. You know, we were everywhere because I had spent 4 years doing a lot of stuff by myself, right? So I went to community events and community meetings, family, you know, stuff by myself. And so when he came home, I drug him everywhere. Right, we going. We were everywhere because I was like, that was the agreement, right? Because there were things like I chose to not do. And then there were some things that he asked me, wait till I come home. Will you wait till I come home? We'll do this and we'll do that. And, you know, I promise when I come home, you know. So basically there are things that I didn't do, waiting for him to come home, you know, major events, you know, we didn't. And when I think about, like, you know, even though we didn't end up doing the Essence Festival, but like big stuff like that, you know, he's like, oh, I want to experience that together, you know. So there were a lot of things that I didn't do. And so I was taking him everywhere and just enjoying having him home. But it was an adjustment because you're so used to having this barrier between you and only being able to see each other for, you know, a prescribed amount of time with all these, you know, rules, and not having
now
any of that.
Wide open. Like, whatever.
It's wide open.
Anything goes.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, I knew this going into it, but certainly after he came home, I'm very much an introvert, and I love my solitude. And so living with somebody and being like somebody's always there, like always around and always, like that was an adjustment that I was not ready for. So, but I loved having him home. Like that was nothing to compare to having him home, but it was an adjustment for both of us.
Right. And I remember you mentioned something in the book about like you get up, go to the bathroom. Where are you going? Like, to the bathroom. That's what I guess because he was so used to having to report for everything, every move that he made, he was putting you in that same box, so to speak.
Right.
So of course, after a while of being home, and he was able, to do some things with his book. I remember he got a job working at one of the local papers there in Detroit, and then at a certain point, some things started to get some things started to take a little turn for you in the relationship, and then, well, you can talk about that. And then not too long after, I believe you wound up getting pregnant with your beautiful baby boy.
Yes. So we were not planning to start a family that soon after he came home, but we were both really excited about starting a family. So when he got locked up, he was 19. He had two different children by two children by two different women. One was a few months old when he got locked up, and then his girlfriend at the time was pregnant with his son. And so he wasn't able to be present. He was locked up for 19 years. And so he wasn't able to be present in the way that he wanted to be for his children because he was in prison for so long. And so he was excited about starting a family and being able to start over again and be the father that he wanted to be to his two oldest children. And then, I didn't have any children when I met him. And I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was 30. So my biological clock was ticking loud. I was like, so deciding to wait for him meant delaying motherhood. And that was a huge thing. And he was locked up for 4 years. And so that meant, by the time he came home, I was about to turn 35. And we didn't want to start a family right away because we knew he needed some time to adjust. Like we were like logically like, you need time to adjust. We knew that a baby would add a lot of, pressure and would complicate things. But at the same time, we didn't do anything to not have a baby. I'll put it that way. So we ended up, he came home in June of 2010. And the following March, I discovered I was pregnant.
Oh, okay.
So he wasn't home for very long, and then my son was born at the end of 2011. So he had been home about a year and a half when our son was born. So the having a child did not solve any problems, as you know. It never does. It only makes things worse in many cases. But he's a light. His name is Sekou, and he is an absolute joy. And I say, the title sort of implies that the relationship didn't work out. The Love, Prison, Made, and Unmade, right? So the relationship didn't work out. But after the relationship ended, I would sit and think and ask God, why? Like, why me? Why this relationship? Why I went through so much? Like, why didn't this work? And my son is my why, and I realized that, we were meant to meet for us to create him. And and that, and as crazy as this may sound, if I had to go through it all over again to have him, I would, because he is an absolute joy. He is my biggest cheerleader. He is just a ball of love and energy, and he's everything. I mean, I only have one child, and he is my world, and I thank God for him. So.
Right. And since we are Facebook friends, I get to see him a lot, and he is a joy. He's a sweetheart.
He is.
And that's one of the things that for me, I find was just a triumph in the book. Like you said, a lot of things happen, and sometimes the things can be good, it can be bad, a lot of roller coaster up and down, but that was the life that you were meant to bring into the world.
Yeah.
And I look at it just knowing your story, some of the things we didn't talk about, and knowing that there were some things in Shaka's life as well. Both of you all get to parent in ways that maybe you weren't parented. So
Yes.
that's a positive. He can be the father that your dad wasn't. You can be the mother that his mom wasn't.
Right.
You can love on that little boy and just really help him, perhaps not go forth and do some of the same things, or have some of the same traumas or issues that you all may have had in your lifetime. So that's the blessing. That's one. But you know what? The other thing I got out of the book, Ebony, just reading you personally, what you went through, and just watching you grow spiritually, how different things would happen, and you would pick up books and read and study, whether it was Iyanla Vanzant and setting up your altars, which help you to grieve your father, or books that you read that just allowed you to have peace when different things were going on with Shaka, and he wasn't getting out of prison in the way that you thought. So for me, that was another awesome thing that I got from reading the book. I'm like, look at her. Go ahead, Ebony.
Yeah, and that's the other. You're right. I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's the other upside of all this, is that I grew in ways that I didn't know I needed. I grew in so many ways, and even we broke up. It's been 5 years, and even in the 5 years since we broke up, I've grown in so many ways. Like, that experience took me through the fire, if you will. And I've just grown so much on the other side of that. And I'm just so grateful for the woman that I am today because of that relationship. And I want to say, I see there's a question. Actually, there's two questions, but I want to ask.
Right. One, did you ever do the Harlem Book Show? Did you all ever get to do that?
You know what? I didn't do that event, but I do write in the book that I did visit the Harlem Book Fair, is what it's called. The Harlem Book Fair was an annual event. They don't do it annually anymore, but it was an annual event. And it was a huge event with tons of readers. And I did go because I wanted to check it out first. My brother happens to live in Jersey, so I went to visit him and checked it out, and wanted to get an idea what that event was like before making the investment, because it's a huge investment for anybody, for publisher or any, vendor. And so as a self-published company, I, wanted to check it out first. So I did go. But it was a great expense, and I could not afford to do that. And we never ended up doing that once he came home. But it was definitely on our sort of dream list of events to do. But at some point, I can't remember when, it kind of fell off. And so we ended up not making it to the Harlem Book Fair. But the other question about
I was going to get to that, so I'm going to hold on to that one. Because actually, the book ended when you all broke up and you moved out and got a place to live in downtown Detroit. That's where the book stops. But I know you don't live in Detroit anymore.
No.
You currently live in California. So if you could kind of briefly tell us about that transition, and then we can get into the question about co-parenting, because that's something that's happened recently, the TED Talk.
Yeah. So we broke up in 2015, and the following, well, let me just say, for those of you who may not be familiar with Shaka, we broke up in 2015, January of that year. In June, he did an interview with Oprah for her show, Super Soul Sunday. After that interview, he was offered a major book deal with Penguin Random House for his memoir, Righting My Wrongs. And his career just took off from there. Okay. And so his book was released in 2016. And we did a book tour. So I think it was, how many cities did we do? I think maybe six cities or so we did on his book tour. And one of those cities was LA. And so he had been to LA a couple times at that point. But after our trip to, we did a book event in San Francisco and one in LA. And after we came back to Michigan from California, we started talking about, the possibility of moving out west and his dream of, becoming a writer of movies and TV. And so, I've always, even though we weren't together, I had always, supported his dream. And I continued to do that after we broke up. And I actually, living in Detroit all my life, I was tired of the snow. I was tired of the cold weather. And we had talked about moving somewhere warm when we were together, possibly Atlanta or just somewhere warm. Right. And so he had kind of gotten this bug to move out west. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. I'm open to it. And, our son was 3 at the time. And I knew he wasn't going to move if my son and I weren't going to move too.
Right.
And I'm never one to hold somebody back from their dream. And I really did feel like, being in LA would help his career, his writing career.
Right.
And so the work that I was doing at the time, we were actually working together for a criminal justice reform organization. And the work that I was doing was remote. So I was working from home. I didn't have to pick up, I'd have to get a new job or, try to find employment. So it was like, I can work from anywhere. So why not? So we packed up in 2016 and moved to LA. And the past 4 years have been, a roller coaster. He's, doing his thing and making his mark here in LA. And it wasn't until we actually moved here that I started thinking about writing for TV and film. And I'm like, you know what? I think I want to do that too.
Right.
Especially once I started really working on my book, because I had actually started my book before we moved. Because it was after, okay, so let me give you all a bit of background, right? Because some people have asked me, why did I write the book? And, to give you some context. So when he was locked up, we had talked about writing a book together, sort of a he said, she said about our love story and how we met. And, we thought that would, be really dope to kind of co-author a book about our love story. So we worked on it a little bit before he came home. And then once he came home, we, revisited the idea and had sort of started working a little bit on it. But, we had saved all of our letters. So every single letter I'd written him, he had saved. Every single letter or card he had sent me, I'd saved. So we had all this research, right, that needed to be done. Mm-hmm. We had to reread all these letters. So we were supposed to be publishing this co-author book by us under our, publishing company. Right. And as life would happen, we didn't pull anything together. And then in 2015, we broke up. And I was like, you know what? There's that. There's no need to write the love story because, it didn't work out. It wasn't sort of the fairy tale that we had planned that we were going to write when we first, had this idea. And so I basically, had decided that the book was, let me just say this. So we self-published his memoir before it was picked up in 2015 by Penguin Random House. So we self-published his memoir and it did very well. But he had written some of our story in his memoir. And so he came to me in 2015, just before we broke up. And this is the universe, right? He had come to me just before we broke up and was like, I think you should write your story. Like you should write a book from your perspective. Since we were supposed to do the two of us together and he had kind of already written some of our story from his perspective. He was like, I think you should write a book about, from your perspective. And I was like, no, I'm reluctant because we were supposed to do it together. And I thought it was going to be really dope to do this he said, she said thing. And finally, I was like, you know what? Okay, you know what? I'll tell my story. I'll tell this from my perspective. Right. And literally 2 or 3 weeks later, we broke up. Oh, so wow. I know that it was God planting the seed for me to write this on my own because I would have never probably thought to write the book on my own if that seed hadn't been planted before we broke up. So we broke up in January. The following year, in 2016, is when his major, publishing deal, that book, was released. And I was on tour. Me and our son went on tour with him. And in almost every city that we went to, I had people who walked up to me and said, I was excited to meet Shaka, but I was really excited to meet you. I couldn't wait to meet you. I wanted to know more about your story. I want to know more about you. And I'm like, okay, I'm standing, on the sidelines and kind of in the background, and people are wanting to meet me. And that's when God planted it in my spirit and was like, tell your story anyway.
Absolutely.
So even though the story ended, the romantic love story ended, he was like, the spirit said, keep writing. Somebody needs to hear your story.
Absolutely.
And so literally when I got back from that trip to California, I started writing what is now the Love Prison Made. And that took, over a year for me to write it, because I had to read all those letters, because I hadn't done that at that point. I had to read all those letters, categorize them, figure out what I was going to excerpt, and that kind of thing. And it also helped me to remember details, because there were some things that I didn't remember. But so that's that. And to go back to the co-parenting, I'm of the mind that, children are worth the effort to work out whatever issues you have, right? And you'll learn in the book, some of the things that happened during our relationship. And I could have easily washed my hands and said I was done, and been very difficult. Like a lot of women carry that hurt and that pain.
Right.
And it impacts how they co-parent, and they weaponize children. Mm-hmm. And because of my experience with my parents and seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard as a child, I was determined not to allow my hurt from our relationship to impact the way my son would be raised, right? I wanted his father to be in his life and to be an active part of his life. And that's one of the reasons why I decided that I would move to LA, so that he could continue his career, because I wanted us to be able to co-parent together. Right. And so we have our ups and downs, like any, relationship. And, but our son is at the center, and we always put him first. And that's just what we do.
Right. And the person had asked about the TED Talk. Was it late last year or early this year? This year, I don't know when it was. I know that 2020 has been quite a trip, but you went back home to Detroit, and the two of you did a TED Talk together talking about co-parenting. And I will post that up on the pages for those, so the two of you, so the people who didn't see it can see it. So, but I thought that was a real blessing that you were able to do that and go back home and talk about your story and have your son with you. So
I see a question about my relationship with my mom. So I want to answer that. So my mom actually passed in September of last year. But before she passed, our relationship was evolving. I think, without saying too much, she didn't agree with my relationship with Shaka. She had concerns, and sort of held out until he came home to have sort of final judgment of him. But she still didn't really fall in love with him like I would have wanted. You want your mom to love the person that you plan to spend the rest of your life with, right? A relationship is important. But I think she was still very skeptical of him. And so it wasn't until we broke up that we got close again. Mm-hmm. And I think that it was through our shared heartbreak, her heartbreak from her relationship with my dad. And by the way, my father died. My mom was 39 when my father died. Mm-hmm. And she may have dated for like the first year or two after that, but she never dated again. She never remarried. She never dated, fell in love again. So she had carried a lot of weight and a lot of bitterness, which is one of the reasons why I decided to, love despite the odds, because I knew my mother was very bitter. Her response to that relationship was born out of bitterness because of her marriage to my father. And so our relationship was strained. It was, one of those things where I really couldn't talk about him to her. But once we broke up, she was there for me, and she understood. She supported me and let me know that, I was going to be okay. And, so we grew closer. And that meant a lot, that we were able to bond over, unfortunately, bond over heartbreak, but we were able to bond and grow closer before she passed.
No, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. And I understand, as I mentioned earlier, I lost my dad a couple years ago. So that's a wound. It takes a while. I don't think you never totally heal from that. Never totally heal from that, especially if it's the parent that you were closest to. Well, I have two more quick questions. One, okay, that was then. This is now. So how are you in the love space now? You don't have to tell your business, but are you open to dating, being in relationship again? Because a lot of times,
absolutely,
you've been through things and you might be a little apprehensive. So we want Ebony to be in love.
I know. There's so many people who have read my story or know my story that have been rooting for me, and I can't say much. I'm an open book, but I can't say much because I have little ears that are.
Gotcha.
But let's just say. And so I'm very private with when it comes to that, as a around him, as I'm sure you all know. So let's just say I'm good. Yeah,
that's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear, because we like with your mom, it was like, I'm done. We don't want that to be.
I did not want to be like my mom. I did not want to be like my mom, and it pained me. As her daughter, once I got older, of course I would tease with her, because I actually didn't want her to find somebody else, because I didn't know if I would like, the idea of her, kissing somebody and, being with somebody. But that's because she had not brought anybody around us, you know what I mean? And so the idea of her being with somebody else was, I just couldn't fathom it. But I didn't want to be my mom. I didn't want to be, because she was so young, and I'm 45, and I just can't imagine. My mom passed at 70. She was 70 when she passed, and to know that basically from the age of 40 until 70, that's 30 years. That she never found love again, that she never married again, that she never even really dated anybody seriously, and she may have done some stuff that I didn't know about. I'm sure. But just to know that, she never found love again, and carried that pain for so many years, and she just, was content with not being, content with being alone. And I know at some point as women, we do have, or anybody, but you just have to get to a point where you're like, okay, God, if somebody comes along, fine. If not, I'm okay. And I think that's kind of what happened with her. She just kind of was like, you know what, if somebody comes along, fine. And but she was also very, very skeptical of people. So he would have had to have been Jesus. He would have had to have been Jesus. Okay. Just like,
who's your husband, Jesus?
Yes, because she didn't trust nobody. She didn't trust nobody. So, but
my last question for you is, what are you working on now?
I'm so excited, actually. So another thing that came out of the spiritual work that I did, and the work that I continue to do, is understanding why I've had this experience, right? And so I realized that I didn't have anybody to help me navigate this road when Shaka came home. Mm-hmm. And I want to be that light for someone else. And so the next thing I have planned, which I hope to launch in January, is a relationship coaching program for women who are in relationships with men in prison.
Okay.
Because despite the fact that mine didn't work out, I believe that it's possible for these relationships to work. I think it's possible. but you have to be prepared. You have to know the pitfalls. You have to have a plan in place. And we didn't have a plan. So I want to be able to provide that kind of coaching and guidance that I didn't get to women. Because at the end of the day, here, and just really briefly, not to get too political and get into statistics, but we know that the majority of the prison population is Black.
Right.
And anytime I can work to heal a Black family, which is really what this is about for me, to heal a Black family, no matter how you met, no matter how long you knew each other, the point for me is if I can help keep a family intact, I want to be able to do that. And so although I'll be working with women of different, groups, my primary focus is on Black women, Black families, and trying to help them navigate that space so that they have a greater success, likelihood of success than I did.
Awesome. And I've put it up, but you can share. How can we stay in touch with you? How can we follow you? Know what you've got going on. I've got your Facebook and all that stuff scrolling, but if there's something that I missed, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, your website, if there's something that I missed.
That's so cute. Yes. So I am primarily on Facebook and Instagram, but on Instagram I am at Love is Our Superpower. On Facebook, my sort of public page is Ebony Roberts, Ph.D., but then I also have a private page, and you can send a friend request to my private page, which is just Ebony Roberts. But I love the community of women that have found me through this book. Like my prayer every day when I sat down to write was that God would use me and that whoever needed to read this book would find it. And so I feel so blessed the people that I've met on this journey, and I love to stay connected. I love to hear feedback, good or bad. Because I have some people that are like, yeah, you were crazy. I thought you was crazy before I read the book. Now I've read the book. I still think you're crazy. And that's fine. You can still think I'm crazy.
But you know what? Some people say that about dating, online dating and stuff, because you don't know. I mean, to me, it's
yeah. You taking a chance,
taking a chance no matter what. So I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, but I would love to stay connected, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to inbox me or DM me on Instagram. I'm always open to the conversation, because one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was to try to dispel some myths, and also just to shed some light on the challenges that that couples face. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you. Thank you all for your questions and for tuning in. This has been great.
Absolutely. Well,
and this is a high quality production here. Let me just say.
No production. Well, before I go, one of the things I always do is announce what our book is going to be for the next month, and also give a copy of that book away. So I'm going to post the book name first. Let me see. Got to do a little flip-flop in here. And actually, the next one will be on September the 3rd, which will be a Thursday, because the first Monday is actually Labor Day. So we don't want to anything on Labor Day. But our book is going to be Sensuous Knowledge by Mina Salami, aka Miss Afropolitan. And it's not about sex, just so you know. This is, let me put it in front of my face, you can see it. This is the book. It's a Black feminist approach for everyone. Mina is actually going to be our first international guest because she lives in London. But she's going to come on. She has a blog by the name of Miss Afropolitan. She's going to come on and talk to us just about some things as it pertains to Black women and feminism, whether you're from Africa and in America as well. So this is a little more nonfiction, but I think it'll just be a good read, and she will be a great guest that will be on September 3rd. So and you can do this as well, Ebony, in the comments. For those who are here, drop a number between 1 and 64 in the comments, and one of you will win a copy of this book for next month.
And I want to say that's the also published by my publisher, Amistad.
Oh, okay. Let me look.
Is it by Amistad?
It is.
Yeah.
And
So
actually,
Amistad. Go ahead.
one of our previous guests, also from Detroit, Jessica Caremore, she actually recommended this. So
Okay.
yes.
Yes. Amistad is the, I think, only Black imprint under a major publishing house like HarperCollins. You obviously have smaller Black publishers, but
Right.
Amistad's been around for over 30 years and publishes Black voices that are sometimes not heard by other, are not picked up by other publishing houses. So I'm excited to see that that's a Amistad book.
Yes. And drop your number or tell me what it is, one or the other.
It looks like I can't comment. I don't see where I can comment.
It might be under private.
Oh, do I do private? Okay.
And then I'll just
Okay.
grab it and we'll see who wins when I pick this number. Actually, there's several giveaways tonight, so today is a good day to be here. But the first will be for next month's book. Let me see. Get your number. Okay, you have 18, and let's see what number I draw out of y'all. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And anyone who watches it on the replay as well, we appreciate you.
Yes,
and thanks for those who
absolutely.
bought the book, because there were some people who bought the book through the link that I shared. So that's good for me.
Yeah.
Okay, the number I have is 54. Okay, and I see someone pick 55, but I don't know who that is. So whoever you are that picked 55, please drop your name in the comments so I know who you are. And then also send me a message. You can send a message either to the Brown Girl Collective page, or if you're on the BGC Book Club page, send me a message with your address and I'll make sure the book gets out to you. So that was number 55. Please tell me who you be. All right, if you're still here, and if you're not,
Sally Benjamin.
Sally Benjamin. Hey, that's my mama's best friend. Woo!
Oh, awesome.
That was not planned. Okay, Auntie Sally, I got you. So I will send you that book, and that will be for next month. Okay, I got a couple more giveaways here. Actually, I'm just going to pick numbers today. I was going to do it differently, but I'm going to pick numbers this time. So let's see. What number am I getting next? Okay, 31. Let's see. Who's 31 or close? Okay, I see 34. Who is number 34? Please drop your name so I know who you are. And put your number next to your name so I can make sure I got the right person. 34. Who are you? Let me know. And whoever you are, number 34, when you drop your name, you will be getting a copy of Tiffany D. Cross's Say It Louder, which is pertinent in this time. It's about Black voters, white narratives, and saving our democracy. That is important in an election year. Debbie, oh, hey, Debbie from Charleston. Good deal. 2 more giveaways. I'm feeling gracious today because I just moved and I'm happy. Okay, let me pick another number. Okay, this is 12. Okay, Ruby Sullivan. I see that you are 13. Let me see if this is. Well, actually, wait a minute. I have 11 and a 13. So, well, a couple of 13. So let me see. How am I going to split this? Tell you what I will do. Well, I guess I'm going to give away 3 because you all were very close. So 3 of you, and I do have the names. Congratulations. You are going to get a copy of A Black Women's History of the United States. Because if you're following Brown Girl Collective, you know I do a lot of history. So the 3 of you will get that. So let me just write down the names because it wouldn't be fair to me to just pick one, so all 3. So it's Ruby. And please, everyone, either through the Brown Girl Collective page or on the BGC Book Club page, please send me your address so I can get the books out to you. And that's Deborah, Evans, Ruby Sullivan, and it was one more. Jan Williams. Okay, and last but not least, and these I actually don't have copies of, so I can't show them to you, but in 2 days we will mark the 1 year anniversary since Toni Morrison passed away on August the 5th.
It's been a year. Wow.
It's been a whole year. As I said, this last season has just been so crazy that it doesn't, time is just going by so quickly. But in light of that, and being that she is one of the patron saints of literature, Black literature, specifically, you are actually, whoever I choose now is going to get a 3-pack. You will get a copy of The Bluest Eye, which was her first novel. You will get a copy of The Pieces I Am DVD, which is her life documentary.
It was awesome.
And you will get a copy of the Toni Morrison Book Club, which is not her book, but it's a book written by 4 people who bonded over reading Toni Morrison books. So you get the grand prize for tonight. So let's see who it is. Let me see who that is. 34, Stacy. Okay, Stacy Madison. Oh, wait. No, wait a minute. What happened? I did something. Deborah already won something. So, Stacy, you're the next closest with 34 because I think Stacy had the closest to one of the other numbers. So, or did I have 34 in there twice? Anyway, Stacy, you won. I'm not going to cause confusion. Stacy Madison, who's also a girl trekker.
Yay.
Who also has a Detroit connection. So, Stacy, you will get the Toni Morrison gift pack. So, as I said, everyone, please, thank you for joining us. Please, if you won something tonight, please send me your addresses, either through the Brown Girl Collective, privately, obviously. Send it to me there or through the BGC Book Club, and I will make sure I get everything out to you. So thanks again for joining us tonight.
Yes, congratulations, everybody.
I appreciate you. Hopefully you can join us on some other occasions as well, so that you can know what we've got going on. And to everyone, have a good night. Please continue to stay safe out there.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Everybody.
Have a wonderful night.
All right. Y'all have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.